Hi, everyone. We just wanted to welcome you to our event tonight. We're going to get started shortly, but we just wanted to thank you all for being here with us, and we look forward to the conversation.
Wow.
If you look at my life, see what I see.
Brian, I hear you. Brian. I'm muting you. Wait, I can't hear it.
Peace to all the brothers and sisters out there.
Same to you. All right, guys, so we're going to get started I'm going to give people about 4 more minutes, 7:40. We like to be prompt, So we're giving people time to file in, and we're going to start right at 7:40. All right, friends, it's 7:40. We start on time. Okay. All right. So first of all, welcome to Let's Talk Dammit. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our first time actually virtually, so this is cool. I just want to do a few housekeeping things, and then we're going to get into a couple ground rules, and then we're going to get into the actual discussion. So the first thing is, of course, this is virtual, so we want to make sure that we're able to hear everybody and, keep the conversation clear. So if everybody can have your mic muted at all times, that would be perfect for me. Also, we do kind of want it to still be a little bit organic. So it is okay if you want to ask questions, if you want to comment, or if you want to have dialogue, that is perfectly fine. If you go to your Zoom, the little screen, you should see a thing at the bottom that says reactions. It has a little smiley face. If you put a thumbs up, That'll let me know that you have a comment, you have a question, or you have a concern. If you don't really want to talk, you can always go to the text box. It should be a little panel on the side. You can go to the side and you can type in whatever you want to type in as far as, a question, and I'll be able to get your question from there. Just make sure that when you ask a question, that it goes to everyone in the meeting. So there should be a drop down option for you to send who you want in the chat and then put in everyone. And then that's how we'll be able to get the question. So that's all the housekeeping rules. The ground rules is that Black Market has always been and will always be a space for inclusivity. So with that being said, we want this to be a really respectful place. We're all here for love and to find solutions and to listen and to learn. So that's all I have to say for now. I'm going to moderate. My name is JT, so you'll probably, hear me going back and forth a lot. Not really that much because I don't really know what I'd be talking about. We have a panel for that. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. We have an amazing panel, by the way, like bomb. We have a really bomb panel. I can't wait for you guys to hear what they're going to talk about. So I'm going to unmute some of you guys and the panelists, so that you can actually hear what they're about and who they are, so you know who you'll actually be talking to. So I'm going to be going to Frederick first. And Frederick, if you can just unmute yourself. Yep, there you go.
You got me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, what's up, everybody? My name is Frederick Murphy. Thanks for having me on. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the city of Charlotte. I have a private practice. I also work with Atrium Health in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system. On top of that, I am a documentarian here in Charlotte as well. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Nice. All right. Next, we're going to go to Dr. Phil Murray.
Oh, you already unmuted me? Okay, thank you. Phil Murray, adult and child psychiatrist, work for Atrium, one of the big health systems here. I see adults and kids, and I work for an ACT team, which is for folks with severe mental illness. So we'll do my best to contribute a little something. Just happy to be here.
All right, we're going to go to Ohavia Phillips.
What's up, beautiful people? I am Ohavia Phillips, talk show host of The O Show from Brooklyn, New York, but I reside in the beautiful Queen City, and I'm so excited to be here, currently pursuing my doctorate, and I'm studying this topic that we are discussing, so I'm so excited to put my studies to motion. I'm here to serve you guys. Love you.
Next, we have Karine DeShield. Hold on.
Let me unmute myself. There it is. There it goes. Hello, everyone. It's been a long week. It feels like a few years. I'm Karine DeShield. I am a creative doer. I am a storyteller and podcaster, as well as a person who does events for corporate America, as well as someone who owns a creative marketing agency, and just someone who loves equality and human rights and advocacy. So I'm very, very happy to be here today and really thankful that you're joining us.
Next, we have Dammit Wesley.
Unmute. There we go. Can y'all hear me?
Oh, wait.
Wait a minute, hold on. We got a lot of feedback in here. It's modern and everything here. So.
Wait, I can't mute my shit.
Okay, so hi, my name is Dammit Wesley. I'm probably I'm the least academically qualified person to be in the room, but I'm an expert in being a Black guy for like the past 33 years. So yeah, I created this space. We're all Black in some kind of way. Let's have fun. Let's talk. I know you're angry, so drop as many F-bombs as you want. Safe place. Yeah, let's get it, y'all.
Next, we have Carla Erin Lopez.
All right. I'm nervous. I'm an artist, a teacher, and a mommy. I'm a professional hellraiser and resident villain. I also work within CMS. I am a middle school art teacher. My specialty is helping to mentor other teachers and how to have a positive experience with Black and Brown children. And then I just like raising hell on the art scene because it makes me extremely happy.
And last but not least, we have the people's professor, honestly, the professor that changed my whole undergraduate experience with African American Studies. We have the one and the only Dr. Belk.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Adolphus Belk Jr. I am a professor of political science and African American studies at Winthrop University. I had the pleasure of having JT and Dammit Wesley as undergraduates at the WU, so I enjoyed that. And I think I was probably a late add to this, and that's cool, but one of the things that I can't lose sight of is that I've been doing a lot of media hits lately, and the reason people are calling me is because a Black man was brutally killed in public, as a 17-year-old sister recorded, coming on the heels of multiple public executions of Black people, and the collective frustration feeling that no one would be held accountable for it. And so while I appreciate being invited to be a part of this conversation, it weighs heavy on me, and I'm certain it's weighing heavy on other people, that we're gathering in these ways because of what's been happening to people over and over and over again in plain view with little accountability. And a positive thing, not to be, a downer, shout out to the home team, Ohavia, from Brooklyn. I'm from East New York. What's up?
What up, family? Come on, East New York.
My daddy and I'm from the South, though.
That's all right. You still count.
I've been down here half my life.
Cool. All right, so that is the panel that we have for you guys this evening. So we're going to go ahead and start with our very first question that we have. And the very first question is the hard-hitting one. The very first question that we have is, what does realistic change look like today? If any point, if the panelists want to unmute and chime in.
So I do want to go ahead and take a stab at that, mainly because I think one thing we are forgetting is that change has happened and it can go in entirely range of things. I'm the kind of person where I have to understand history via pop culture and then work my way backwards. So based on how we've had a schooling experience and who's been around us from the 80s to the present, that has been one form of change. And even that change and educational change came with fallout. But also at the same time, culturally, we've changed as a group of people. I will say that. I say it all the time. A white dude wearing a fitted and sneakers in the 2000s was very rare and it looked strange. White dude wearing a fitted and sneakers in 2020, we're asking him where he got that fitted in those sneakers. So culturally, yes. Visually, yes. It appears that there has been a change.
Okay, for some people who are still joining, first question that we have is, what does realistic change look like today?
Hey, beautiful people. So to me, realistic change looks like pulling up. And pulling up is a colloquialism for engaging in conversation, shifting communities, and understanding what your influence is used for. Now more than ever, it is so important for us to speak out, right? And we're being told so often, like, well, don't come off as too angry. And even amidst this tension and everything going on in the world, there's still kind of a crafting and a structuring of what our messaging looks like. But now's the time that you take how you talk, you take how you walk, you take those experiences, you take those shared experiences, engagement, and conversations, and you have them, right? And this is not for just Black and brown people. This is also for our beautiful white brothers and sisters. Now's the time that you ask us, pull up on us, ask us, hey, listen, how can I serve you? What conversations are we missing? And what resources can I offer you? I said earlier on the live that now more than ever, I want a relationship, but what about that resource? The two work hand in hand, and now's the time to figure out, okay, how can we marry these two things so we can continue to put important discussion in the forefront, mixed with education and engagement, because resources is nothing without education. You got to know the why and why you're doing it. So do your research, and then we can continue to not only mesh those messages, but bring them in our communities to uplift our children. Because that's who this is about. That's really who this is for, is making sure our children aren't raised and reared to think a certain way that is completely rebirthing the narrative, right? So what I would definitely say is pull up. Ask us, we will tell you. Pull up, ask us, we will give you grace and space, but how will we know if that space is not accommodated for people to do so? So that's just my 2 cents. I think that's what I would like to see, and that's what's making that available. Thank y'all.
I think to approach this thing, it has to be done from an equitable standpoint. When we talk about school systems, when we talk about food deserts, when we talk about healthcare access, when we talk about all of these different things, if they're not equitable measures put in place, someone's always going to feel slighted. And guess who's always the one that's slighted? Brown and Black folks, right? Like there's no way around anything in which we're talking about unless equitable practices are put in place. The policies, the laws, and everything put in place for this country was based on Black skin. We're the original currency. When you're able to throw Black bodies off of slave vessels, right, off of slave ships, and once you get to land, you're able to claim them as a loss from an insurance standpoint. I mean, your system's fucked up. Pardon my language, but it just is what it is. And the start of that and other things have continued to perpetuate year after year, century after century, generation after generation. And this is what we've come to, where we're at right now. So when you see why people are so upset and everything, God rest the dead, it was not just a knee on the back of someone's neck. This is cumulative, and it has been for a very long time. And until people don't feel slighted, until people feel included, until people feel like they have the same exact access that was taken away to a certain degree, because when we look at Black Wall Streets, when we look at all these different microcosms of different neighborhoods and African-American communities from a historical standpoint that actually was self-sustainable and progressive, when those things are brought back and people can say, okay, I'm getting my swag back, right? Like we're back rolling again, then I think things will get better at that point. But until then, people will always feel slighted because things are not done, specifically Black and brown folk, because things aren't done on an equitable plane.
I tend to come at this from the perspective of a social scientist, right? And if I think about the African-American struggle, my late dissertation advisor wrote a book with her husband called The Long Struggle for Freedom, and looking at the African-American movement for full inclusion in American society, right? People wanted freedom, justice, equality, peace. That's what it's always been about. And there are these moments when, as a result of people's activism and agitation, concessions are given. Concessions are won because people either disrupted the system or tried to get into the system to make it yield things, right? So if we look at Jim Crow was about more than water for chocolate. The money followed white children. They had better physical facilities. They had better paid teachers. They had better equipment. They had better instructional things, right? The resources followed the children. So if you can systematically exclude people from participating in politics as voters, if you can exclude them from participating in politics as office holders, then you can control all the resources that are at the disposal of a government, be it city, county, state, or federal. So the question is, what does progress look like? What does change look like? We need policy changes because these problems were created as a result of actions by public and private actors, right? public and private actors. We think about housing. You don't get a racially segregated nation to the extent that this country has remained segregated without some sort of collusion between public and private sector actors, right? So if public policies were used to create the problems, then public policies have to be used to engage those problems. So we have to identify and solve the problems. Policy has to be a part of it. And in moments like this, you know, people will say, well, why is it that they're rioting? And what is this going to change? Riots change a lot because people see the alternative if you step away from the negotiating table. People like King and others who believed in nonviolent direct action were made more effective because of the presence of people like Malcolm, who were like, well, if we break the foot, there won't be any more kicking. So there's a room for people to do different things to advance our agenda. And I think that this moment, as awful and painful as it's been to observe, can produce the type of changes that might yet save us from social catastrophe.
JT, I just want to hop in real quick. So going with your question, like when folks say stuff, I get real simple and real literal about things. And the thing that stuck out was you saying realistic change. And going to Dr. Bell's original point of, you know, basically somebody being killed in public and the frustration that those people won't see justice for it. It really makes me wonder about this concept of what aspects of change are realistic. Just because, you know, this has been going on, as folks have referenced, for hundreds of years. It's been socially sanctioned, legally sanctioned. We've made progress. It's literally been torn down and, you know, kind of advocated as legal. And so I think realistic change, what it looks like, is a bunch of people with really unrealistic optimism and endurance and also coordination in order to get to those points of policy changes, to get to those points of, because ultimately, you know, as Dr. Bell said, freedom, justice, equality, and peace, but really just access to opportunities, just feeling safe in your own skin. And I think the time has passed, unfortunately, for us to appeal our case from a moral basis, because if it was a matter of making sense, which it does, people would listen. And clearly, it's not a matter of making sense. It's a matter of kind of protecting personal interest and doing things in that way. And so realistic change also equals that it has to hurt people on the other side. And so I'm not necessarily, you know, saying that you go and tear up a bunch of stuff where, you know, but I am acknowledging there are different approaches. But I think a lot of what we're seeing, whether it's from a healthcare perspective, economic perspective, and everything else, the segregation, everything, it really screws everybody. And so I think that hurt has to come. You know, the Civil War wasn't something that was initiated by Black people. It wasn't something that was ended by Black people, but it was about us. And it ended up, you know, causing some significant hurt and pain to white America in both very practical ways and economic ways. And so I think that's something that is a part of the realistic change of, as much as we're getting squeezed, it has to be extended to, unfortunately, right now, those who are overrepresented as far as the power aspects. But from there, there's also aspects of practically, you know, talking about things being fought on multiple fronts, getting in those positions to influence policies, getting in those positions to maintain economics, even though there are examples of things being torn down. And when those, unfortunately, inevitable setbacks come up, we have to get back to being unrealistic to make something reality-based.
To answer that question, the best way I can do it is to use an analogy in the famous Quentin Tarantino movie called Kill Bill. The bride once told one of her enemies, in order for us to be even, equal, squaresies, I would have to kill you, have to kill your child, have to go into the room and kill your husband, right? It's a very violent movie, but for me to pretend like change in America isn't going to require a ruthless siege of people willing to be as barbaric as possible to get what is considered just civil rights, just a little shred of humanity. I'm not saying that I want to see that, but the stakes have gotten to a point where we have an enemy that has no conscience and they're not held accountable by any means or measure possible. So for me, change looks very radical. It looks very extreme. It's going to look hopeless at some point. I can only pray that the people that we have on our side, the soldiers that we have in the streets, our lawyers, the people that we have vetting on our behalf to the American government, public and private sectors, have the stamina to stand up to this and survive, I guess, the test of time, because at this point we have the sheer numbers to overwhelm those that want to oppress us. But do we have the heart to continue the fight? Okay, I'm done.
Really quickly, I just want to echo everyone's sentiments, but I also want to start at the root. I want to start at the cause of this. And I want to state that without acknowledging every single factor, well, the main factor that this country was built upon, racism, and actually saying that word and actually saying, racist ideals and racial injustice, without acknowledging that, we're going to continuously go in this vicious cycle. I feel that everyone plays a different role in change, right? And in actual change. And I agree with every single one of the panelists here who has given, their 2 cents on a way of change, a form of change. I think that as things continue to progress, we have to continuously come up with new ways. I think that we too have to evolve. I think that in order to get through to people, I think that this is a heart problem. I think this is a disease. I think that this is something that for so many who are so embedded so deeply within racism, it's going to be so hard to actually change their mindset. So I feel like we have to be strategic. I think that we have to hit racist in people where it hurts most. And most often, that means their pockets. There are Americans that are selfish. There are Americans that are greedy, that are only out for profit and for themselves. And I honestly feel that that is such a huge driving force of this country and consumerism. And I think that in order to, again, affect change, you have to hit those different people in different ways. So I agree with everything that everyone else has said, but that's also another means I feel that would be effective.
Nice. All right. I think that was like, Perrine, you kind of summed that all up, well-rounded it up. The next question that we have is kind of off the shoulder of that one. It says, how do we keep this going? I don't want this to be over in 2 weeks until the next murder. What are some short-term goals that we can put into place? So the question again is, how do we keep this going? I don't want this to be over in 2 weeks until the next murder. What are some short-term goals that we can put into place?
I'm going to sound very cliche, but, there needs to be safe whaling spaces for Black folks. I've been to Selma, Alabama, places in Mississippi, and there's some brothers and sisters that are down there doing some great things that are literally creating spaces for Black folks only. Because when you're caught up in the corporate structure, when you're caught up in education, I've worked in education on the collegiate level as well as in high schools and middle schools and things like that. It's a whole different vibe. If you ever been to a Black barbecue, it's something completely different. And you ain't usually going to get the same person that you get when you at work, because we just turn up like that. We just a little bit different. We do what we do when we at work so you can understand us. But there needs to be spaces to where Black folks can be comfortable in their own skin. There needs to be places in which empathy is allowed and empathy is encouraged. There needs to be spaces to where individuals are not necessarily marked for their cultural norms, and they're able to practice those things. They're able to gather more information to enhance those things. There needs to be designated spaces in order to do such, right? For me as a therapist, from a pro bono standpoint, I try to make sure that I see as many people as I can from a pro bono standpoint, because I know that the lack of access of mental health care for some folks is not there, right? So from that aspect, if you have resources from a mental health standpoint or emotional and behavioral health standpoint, we need to keep sharing those resources. Those are things that we need to do. And of course, from a cliche standpoint, you got to go vote. We have to keep voting the right people that we need in office, as well as calling the people out who we know are skin folk, but they may not really be kinfolk. Right. So that's a lot of it. And again, this is not something what I'm saying is not something that no one has never said before, right? There's been great people before all of us that have said these exact same things, that have tried to implement these exact same instances. But of course, in some cases, the quote unquote powers that be disrupt that. So we have to do what we are good at, and as Black folks, and that's communicating with each other. That's developing strategies to be able to move our agenda forward. And I think that in some cases we've kind of gotten away from that. But I am happy to feel and say that I think it's starting to galvanize and come back together, specifically with some of the things that have happened recently. And I'm not talking about 2020. I'm talking about back to Mike Brown and even earlier to that. So that's my personal opinion on some of the things that we need to do. And our allies, y'all, they have to be there as well. Sometimes they may have to sit outside the gate for a little bit while we do our business on the inside. But once the door opens up, just be ready to come in, learn, and stay in your position to do what it is that you can do by using your influence. I know that's kind of long-winded, but that's what I feel.
Hello. Okay. Hold on one second. So for me personally, I honestly just see like 2020 as the perfect / worst case scenario for something like this to happen. We have people who have been out of work for months. We have people who are not going to go back to work for a couple of months. So this isn't going to end in 2 weeks, because for the first time ever, niggas got the time, right? If I don't have a job to lose, if I don't have to worry about income being lost, if my main concern is where my kids going to be, it's summertime. They're going to be chilling at the house, right? People literally don't have anything to lose at this point for going out and fighting for their freedoms, or at least just fighting for an opportunity to be seen as a human being. So I don't see this ending anytime soon. To what you said, the gate's wide open for the allies to come in. Because honestly, as a Black man, I'm tired of putting myself up as a human shield to die for your right to memorialize me as MLK. It's not fair. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of the narrative. White people's skin game. All right. This is you. These are your tax dollars being wasted to clean up some other white guy's mess, right? So I don't know. I'm not a political scientist. I don't have the answers. I'm just an artist who wants to see some things change in my lifetime. I have 2 parents who lived through desegregation. They told me stories about chaining themselves to fences and getting beat down and sprayed with hoses because they didn't want to go into white schools. Now we're in the white schools and we're experiencing things worse than what they had to go through. That doesn't make any sense. I have grandparents that were born in the early 1900s. They lived through Spanish flu and Jim Crow. I have grandparents that are able to tell me about their parents that were fresh off the plantation, sharecroppers, right? So the stories are still here. Like, I feel the pain. I know the pain. I see it personally. And it doesn't make any sense that 40, 50, 60 years into this movement, we still ain't got shit to show for it. So I'm putting the yoke on the white folk. The white people in the room that have brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, this is your responsibility to fix this sickness, not mine. I can only protect myself.
To echo what was said by Dammit, I will say this, is that we have carried this cross for a minute. We're very tired. We're actually tired. That's an extra form of tired. We're tired. And imagine your parents telling you, oh yeah, I remember this. Or your grandparents telling you, oh yeah, I remember this. So to echo much of what Dammit was saying, I will say this, I do get it. I do get that we're tired. And now it's time, hey, listen, can you help me carry this cross, right? So for all of the beautiful white people in the room, what does helping us carry this cross look like? It looks like action. It looks like getting off your phone and stepping in them streets. Now, here's what I'm saying. Stepping in them streets looks different for everybody. No, we're not asking for you to, demonstrate, march. But when I was out there yesterday, there were people handing out water. There were people handing out sanitizer, masks. There were people asking, hey, you want to sit in the car real quick until you continue this journey? There are different ways for you to put action behind a caption. And that's what I mean by help us carry this cross. Another way is show up to city council meetings with us. Don't stand beside us, also stand in front of us, stand with us. The resources that you have, share it with us, right? Put it in this group chat, or also put it in other chats, DM us and like, hey, here's what I'm seeing in the back. Here's what y'all will need. Tell me how I can help. Also having tough conversations. Let's discuss what white privilege is. Let's discuss that privileges look different. Let's quit the tone deaf messaging of, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I feel your pain. And instead ask me, I don't feel it. So Could you share some experiences? Or I don't feel it and that bothers me. Can we have conversations? But without action, with some of the things I mentioned, without showing up to city council meetings, without the tough conversations, without identifying the fact that your experience is completely different from mine, what are we really talking about, right? And here's the thing. When we say help us carry the cross, it's not like it's just you, like I'm putting it on you. Nah, I got to take up a front or I got to take up a rear, but I need you to understand we're tired. We get you sympathize, we get you empathize, but we sleepy. And we more than sleepy, we're over it. Now imagine our kids coming up and they're seeing it and they're like, they don't even know where to put this energy. So now we have beautiful Black, brown babies in the households watching this on their phones. It's a recipe for a lot of catastrophe, but I still have hope in humanity, y'all. I'm one of those people. I believe that with the right discussions with things like these, we could change it. But let's do this for real, for real, for real, for real. Thank y'all.
Yeah, I want to drop in and just say, I really want to drop in and just say that it's going to take me a long time to believe a short-term goal from anybody. Because here's my deal. I'm so happy worldwide, so many people are aware of the atrocities that happen to Black people in America. But at the same time, remember, I started my conversation by stating that I pay attention to popular culture for a reason, to understand what people think and do. And here's what I read via our popular culture. Here we have another time where something such as this has gone viral, and now you want to sit in your house and be mad at me, but not meet me on the front line as an educator. When I'm dealing with generational trauma, when I'm dealing with the breakdown of just the human body alone based on diet and lack of access to healthy food on a day-to-day basis for 8 hours a day beyond 180 days out of a 365-day school year. So I'm having a hard time believing short-term goals on a lot of people. Because what I want to know is how do we keep this going? How about a lot of folks show up to these proper places? And there are local organizations that could better answer your questions than me. But what I decided a long time ago with my life was to stay in the classroom with my Black and brown children, because I have no idea who is protecting them from the same people that are telling me they're interested in helping in some kind of way and have gone into education only to be a monster in disguise.
We're going to go to Dr. Bill real quick. He's trying to interject.
I'd be a bad political scientist if I didn't say don't vote, right? So voting is important, but voting is only one way that we can be engaged in politics. But here's why voting is important. I was on Charlotte Talks on Monday, and I was looking at the states that Obama carried in 2012 and the states that Trump was able to flip in 2016. And Obama ran the table with Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida. Trump turned all those places in 2016. And even though we lost the popular vote by 3 million, he got enough electoral votes to win. If we look at those places and we look at what happened with voters voting overall, white voter participation nationally increased in 2016, and for Black folk, it decreased. Some of that had to do with doing things that made it harder for people to participate, voter ID, moving polling stations, closing polling stations. But some of it also had to do with the failure of that Democratic campaign with Hillary Clinton to engage Black voters and to give them something to say yes to other than, hey, I'm not Donald Trump. I look at Ohio, Black voter participation or minority voter participation in Ohio was down 10%. In Wisconsin, it was down 17%. In Florida, it was down 7%. In North Carolina, it was down 12%. If you look at the margin of victory in some of those places, it was under 1%. So a slight uptick, right, can make up for what should be anticipated from white voters. White voters are the most loyal Republican constituency, and white men most especially. Trump won 53% of white women voters. The only category of white women voters that he lost was college-educated white women. So voting matters, right? But then there are other races down the ticket besides the presidency. There's your state representation. There's your state legislative representation. There's your city council, your county council, school board. You have people sitting in school boards that oversee the education of Black and brown children, and they don't have children in the system themselves, right? So it's like, what is your interest in my child's education if you don't have children in the schools and you've displayed no empathy for children who look like my own, right? So we have to be engaged politically on that front, but then other ways to participate. go to the meetings. Somebody asked in the group chat, well, when are the city council meetings? All of this stuff is public. You can go to the meetings as a citizen. You can ask questions as a citizen. You can hold people accountable. These demonstrations have led the mayor of Charlotte to say, we're asking the State Bureau of Investigation to investigate CMPD and to investigate the tactics that are being used for crowd control against nonviolent demonstrators, including tear gas, which is banned everywhere else in the world, but it's being used here for some reason, right? So we have to pay attention to the elections. We have to participate. We have to ask questions. We have to hold people accountable. And the last thing I'll say about elections is this. As voters, the choices we make are limited to the choices that we have. If I have a bunch of trash candidates, then I have to hold my nose and pick the one that least offends me, right? If you feel that kind of way about it, maybe it's time for you to be the candidate, right? We look at what came out of Ferguson, and Ferguson put people on that city council that look like them out of that movement, right? They elected a Black woman mayor this week, right? That came out of that pain and that strife. So if you think the candidates are trash and that you can do better and, you got a good background, go for it. People ask, what do we have to lose? We've seen over the last several years what we have to lose, and it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that being said, for like all the P. Diddy's and stuff out there, how do we turn their demographic? The people that say we got to hold the Black vote hostage because Joe Biden ain't worth it. What are some tactics we can use to convince those people to take their ass out of the house and vote?
Is that a question for me? So I'm gonna say that's a question for me, right? Okay, that's a question for me. The late great Haynes Walton out of Savannah State and the University of Michigan would say there is no Black vote. There are Black voters, because Black folk are diverse and always have been. Always have been, right? You have some pretty socially conservative Black folk. You have some moderate liberal Black folk. You have some progressive and radical Black folk. You got Black folk who have been in this country that can go back to the American Revolution. You got Black folk that pulled up after the 1960s when immigration laws were somewhat liberalized that made it possible for Afro-Latin people to come from the Caribbean and from South America and from Sub-Saharan Africa, right? So Black people have always been diverse. But it's really incumbent on the parties and the campaigns to engage these people. You can't come around now it's wild because the things that Black people want would really benefit all Americans, and you see them routinely in Western Europe. People want universal childcare. The COVID-19 crisis revealed how much of people's healthcare and social supports are contingent on having a job and their children going to school. Because as soon as the schools weren't available, it wasn't just how are Nathaniel and Nia going to get an education. It was, are Nathaniel and Nia going to eat? It was, well, how can I go to work if my child isn't in school because I'm relying on the schools for childcare? Our health insurance is contingent on our status as workers. And if you don't have a job that carries health insurance, you don't have health insurance. And either you try to qualify for public assistance and the bar is too high, or you just go around and hope you don't get sick and have to pay out of pocket. So the things that are of interest to Black people, greater educational supports, larger social safety net, improved public services like transportation and health and everything else, right? These would help all Americans. But because Black people are asking for them, because Black representatives are asking for them, and we're structured as unneedy, undeserving beneficiaries of government largesse, people don't support them. So part of the persuasive task is to convince all these other people that what we want is what they should want, but for their reasons, not ours. Here's what's in it for you if you push for this with us. Here's how you would benefit if you push for this with us. And as far as those Black folk on the sidelines are concerned, we got to get some of those people out, right? We just have to. And what the Obama campaign showed federally in 2012 was that you can get 40% of the white vote and win. That was never the case before. If a Democratic candidate got 40% of the white vote, they got their teeth kicked in. He got 40% support from white voters and won pretty handily because of the broad multiracial coalition that included some of those younger white voters, and then the turnout numbers, right? So you don't win just a majority, you got to get the turnout. So to your point, Dammit, Wesley, If you're going to get people out, you have to give them something to say yes to. You have to convince them that they have a stake in it. And for the sake of their own morale, people want to see wins. Sometimes we're like long suffering fan bases. And if you keep losing and losing and losing, you don't think you're ever going to win. You got to get some W's, and that'll make people believe in their own power for a change.
I did want to give a shout out to Miss Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon Martin's mom, who first ran for office last year in Florida, making a difference, making an impact, making a change. I think that I'm going to be the wrapper-upper person because I really do echo everyone's sentiments. But I did want to just mention when we're talking about short-term change, I don't believe there's short-term change. I feel like there are things in the past that have always been quick fixes that have just never stuck. I think that as a society, we have to think about things that are going to make that lasting impact, that are going to, again, sustain the next generation, right? I think that one of the best things that we can do, and this is regardless of any industry that you're in, is to stop hiring people that just look like you. Even if someone looks like you or doesn't look like you, someone who has the exact same mindset as you. I advocate for Black people to be more in positions of leadership, of power in these organizations, in these corporations, in these businesses. You are not only doing a disservice to your consumers, you're not only doing a disservice to our entire communities by not having us present, but you're doing a disservice to yourself because you're assuming things about us without having us there to advocate for ourselves. So that's a huge, huge, huge part that is, again, another vicious cycle that has to be broken within a multitude of different industries. When I think about corporate America and beyond, we need more Black people, leaders, creatives, advocates, so that we can advocate for ourselves accurately.
And I just wanted to add to that because, this idea of short-term versus sustainable change, I think a lot of it is, we're very reactive. And so when you jump right into it, you get overwhelmed. You're basically in sprint mode when you really need to be in kind of long distance running mode. And so I think you have to be strategic about the spots that you do. When it comes to organizing and things like that, there are a lot of community-based organizations that organize year-round, not just when stuff like this goes on. So even if, let's say you get a little bit tired, which is reasonable, figure out ways that you can support people who are there kind of for the long term in a particular area. But also, if you have the bandwidth, take some time to be reflective and figure out where you can do, where you can make the biggest impact and where it would be sustainable for you. And I think that's where you really have to kind of look at your overall energy and just figure out what's realistic and what's not. And I know for me, like this week, I got overwhelmed. I actually had to take off from work yesterday. And some things that I was fortunate to realize when I take a step back is it's not all on me to do everything at once. And I think if you lose sight of that, it can become overwhelming, it can become daunting, and you'll just say, you know what, there's no point. And realistically, everybody does bring something to the table that somebody else doesn't, even if it's based on your social connections or just kind of points of view. And so I think understanding that importance, and a lot of times you have to have kind of a village around you that reinforces that, and knowing when to plug in fully and when to step back. And I know that takes a little bit more mindfulness, but the more you do it, the easier it is. And it takes a lot of practice, but just realizing that you're not alone in this thing and that it's not all on you and you're not going to get it all right. And that's cool too.
Nice. All right, cool, you guys. The next question that we have, I think some of you guys already touched on it a little bit with your responses, but the next question is, how do we reach a point where legislative and systematic action is taken without waiting for a new set of progressive politicians to be elected? So
drop that in the chat. Drop that in the chat.
I'm going to put it in the chat. The question again is, how do we reach a point where legislative and systematic action is taken without waiting for a new set of progressive politicians to be elected? Take it away.
the elections kind of are what they are, right? And that's a really sometimes long and tedious process to produce change. At the same time, though, we have non-governmental organizations. We have a civil society. Civil society is supposed to exist as the countervailing weight to the power of the state. So you have government on one hand, and then you have the people and their organizations, their associations on the other hand. If you look at African-American history, what it demonstrates for time immemorial, and this runs against the stereotype, is that Black folk haven't sat around idly waiting for someone to save them. They've worked doggedly to save themselves, right, through their own institutions. Sometimes those institutions are faith-based. They're coming out of religious congregations and churches. At other times, they're more civil in nature. Sometimes they are all Black or majority Black. At other times, they're multiracial or multi-ethnic. So if the government isn't moving on things to people's satisfaction, you continue to put pressure on them. You continue to agitate because power concedes nothing without a demand. But then you work through your civic organizations, though at the same time, we can't take that too far, right? I remember, I'm older than most of y'all. I remember being at the Million Man March in 1995, and people were up there talking about, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to save our own communities. And people were like, yeah, and we're going to do this in our communities. And people were like, yeah. And then they're like, yeah, we're going to pick up our own trash. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. No shade to sanitation workers. My dad pushed a broom for a living. But if I'm a taxpayer and I'm paying taxes like everyone else, that service is supposed to be provided for my community, right? So self-help has a place, but it's not wrong for us to demand the government be responsive to us when we are taxpayers and citizens and our resources are going toward that government, right? So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both of those things. So while you're pushing with the elections and pressuring the elected officials, you do things to help in your own communities, but you still hold those people accountable for what they ought to be doing for you because you're a person, you're a citizen, you're a taxpayer.
All right, so this is something I've been speaking about quite often. Like, if you really, really want the change that you seek, there are so many local organizations available for you to assist in helping to make all of our communities better. I mean, the Mel's Place is tucked away on Batersford Road, and I'm sure a lot of people don't realize that there is a group of men who choose to mentor young dudes. And I don't think that anyone's getting paid for it. It's all a nonprofit. They come in, they learn how to garden, and it's something that's theirs. It belongs to them as a group. And that's what I mean by local organizations that have been doing the work, the change that you seek versus, going to go find Amy and all of her stuff goes to a local brewery. Like, if there is a system of community that's working, then why is it that on our end, our system of community is breaking down? And we're looking toward these political figures for guidance. They are not the only ones. If we're looking to truly work together as a community, then I do think that you need to figure out your position real quick. Because I know what mine is. Because I absolutely agree with a lot of people. I'm always down to educate and facilitate, but I no longer have patience for white guilt. And if that means I take a pay cut at the end of the day, because I chose to help Black people, then so be it. I need to exist. I'm the weird Black girl of the group. It makes other weird Black girls across the world and the nation feel better. So I shall exist. That is my position.
Wait a minute, hold up. So I'm only speaking for the creatives out here, right? And while we don't have time to weigh on like new progressive legislation, let's just think about how a man named Donald J. Trump was able to steal the election last year, right? There was a lot of propaganda that was being flooded into social media via like Facebook, Twitter, this, that, and third, right? Those trolls are essentially graphic designers. They're creatives. They're artists. You as an artist, you as somebody who knows how to use Photoshop, you have the ability to create propaganda that can influence and change the course of history. I think it's pretty obvious that propaganda has been used to overthrow regimes or pump toxicity into certain people to force things like uprisings and dissent. We haven't taken full advantage of that. And we know that we as Black people, we're very powerful when it comes to running the internet. Whatever we do, people steal, people follow. All our means are taken. So if we, not even collectively, but if we just did the work to spread misinformation in the same way that our white supremacist alt-right counterparts did, we would effectively make that change. Dr. Umar Johnson has people out here thinking if you drink seaweed, you'll live to be 100 years old. You can do the same shit when it comes to changing politics, whether it's local or national. You can do it. It's in the palm of your hand. You don't got internet, okay? And if you ain't got it, you can post it outside of McDonald's or the library. This shit's free now. There's literally no excuses for you to not be playing your part in effectively changing the mind of those people around. Okay, you can mute this now. I'm done.
Any other of our panelists want to join in on that, or are we good?
I'm gonna be honest. He said Dr. Umar, and I forgot the original question.
100% retweet. I said, oh wow. Oh wow.
Oh, where in the world is Dr. Umar? The question was, give me just 1 second. The question was, how do we reach a point where legislative and systematic action is taken without waiting for a new set of progressive politicians to be elected? That was the question. But I think everybody pretty much summed it up really well. So I think we can move on if we're cool with that. Cool. All right. So the next one is, do we have any advice for people working in white spaces, especially spaces that may not be acknowledging the current climate?
You need that job, right?
Okay.
Now, this is where we have to be practical, right? You know, I learned a long time ago, you can't do just anything for money. I also learned a long time ago that if you wait until you get to a station in life where you're comfortable and secure, you might keep waiting your whole life to say something about things that matter. And so, you know, my attitude was, I'm going to say what I want to say. And if I die young and choke on a chicken bone, I died doing what I wanted to do. But that said, you have to be practical, right? You have lives to live. Being an activist, caring about things doesn't mean that you take an oath of poverty. You have to support yourself. You have to support your family. You might want to have children one day if you don't have children already, right? And these are real pressures that are visited upon people, and they dictate the sort of choices that people make, right? There were a lot of people who felt in their heart that the freedom movement of the 1960s was right, but they couldn't risk their own involvement because that meant that they would starve, that they would get evicted, right? And they didn't want to subject their families to that. So people, you know, we have choices to make, and our choices that can be constrained. So the first thing you have to do is to be able to really go to a happy place. The job is a job. There are certain conversations right now that are weighing heavy on people because people are dumping on all of you emotionally. I pray for y'all that have to go to jobs right now and be in office spaces, because people in wanting to talk to you and see if you're okay, it quickly turns from "are you okay" to "let me show you why I'm one of the good white people and how I'm here for you," right? And that sort of emotional dumping gets really, really heavy. I have a friend who recently was like in a meeting with people. He just told them straight up, like, "Yo, don't talk to me." He's like, "I don't want to talk to anybody. Don't talk to me. If it's not about work, don't talk to me," right? Some of us can't go that hard, but you have to find some way to sort of put yourself in a position where you can show up to the job, do what you need to do, then leave the job. More important, what you do away from the job is what really matters. The job is not your life. The job is something you do to have a life. So if there are things that you enjoy, if it's yoga, if it's exercise, if it's something else, continue to do the things that you enjoy that provide you with some peace and some recreation, right? And that'll really help you.
All right, so I got a couple of things to say. One, I mean, definitely starting off just taking care of your mental health in a number of ways. When it comes down to it, I think practically at work, identifying safe spaces within that. Because one thing I realized is that every white work environment is not necessarily malignant, but even if it's not overtly malignant, that doesn't mean that you feel safe in it, even if it's not something that's kind of written along the walls. And I'll speak personally, I realize that for me, a lot of times, sometimes that's what I carry into the space. Sometimes it's also, you know, just something that I pick up and my intuition happens to be right. So identifying, you know, people that are safe, that you can kind of trust, and hopefully that's well vetted. When it comes to, you know, just using whatever benefits you have from the job, so whether that's employee assistance programs for therapy, whether it's using that insurance that you got to go get checked out, that type of stuff can be helpful. And going with what I said about you not being the only person in a space, depending on what type of environment you work in, some places have resource groups within the office. So that way, and you can also kind of build a coalition. So that way you're not the only one just kind of sticking out. And then sometimes you can lightly suggest in the form of question. For what's going on right now, almost every major corporation has made a statement of some sort. And so even if it's bringing it up to your immediate supervisor or something like that, just say, do we have a policy on this? Just a question, just asking. It doesn't really put you all the way out there to be, exposed to that much harm. And then some of these places, they have corporate matching programs for charitable donations, things like that. And so that way you can use some of the power of the institution without necessarily, firing off an email to the boss talking about 400 years of oppression, all y'all are benefiting, I want double the salary and half the year off. Now if you pull it off, hey, send me a copy because I need it. But, outside of that, that's kind of the way to go. And I like to say I am a millennial, but I have Gen X siblings and baby boomer parents. And so I divorced myself from the idea that my workplace was going to validate my identity a very long time ago. And I feel like for millennials and younger, that's kind of this bill of goods that folks have been sold. One of my homeboys was a little bit older. He was like, hey, man, look, Jesus was technically a carpenter, but his actual work was after the 9 to 5. And so I think that's something that we need to take into the space and realize like, hey, these people don't owe us nothing. And we don't owe them except for what is in our contract and whatever taxes we got to pay to the government. Outside of that, look, when you're on, be on. When you're off, please be off.
I think it's one of the things that we have to do is you have to set boundaries. Like if you walk into that job right after that interview and you come in, got your cape on, thinking you about to be the best worker for this specific company and you're going to turn things out, you finna move up and be VP in 2 years, boom, 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 boom. When the structure isn't there and it's not in place for you to do such, you may want to fall back some and take a deeper look at things, right? So when I first moved to Charlotte from Atlanta, I was the director of counseling at Johnson C. Smith University for years. And then I love the mountains. So I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, because I love the mountains. So obviously, the opportunity came about. So moved up to Asheville. As you can guess, there wasn't very many African Americans at the space that I worked in just because of the population. So it wasn't sitting good with my soul. So I moved back to Charlotte, right? And I got into managed healthcare as a manager for continuing education. And even from there, the corporate structure, it just wasn't fitting good with my soul. So I had to leave it because it wasn't good for me. I was showing up different at home. I was showing up different with my family. I was showing up different. And more importantly, I was showing up differently up here with regards to what I was consuming and things like that. So I took a large pay cut to get back working with the population, not necessarily that I felt more comfortable with, but what brought me more gratification outside of just making money. And then from there, I spawned other different business ventures and things like that. So for me, it was a liberating space, right? But when I did come back to Charlotte after being in Asheville, I set strong boundaries. Specifically when the Keith Lamont Scott case, murder happened, all these white folks were running up to me. Murph this, Murph that. Well, what are you this and this and that? So at that point, I'm about to blow my top. And I'm like, I'm not talking about this anymore. I come here to do my job. And when I get done with my job, I'm out. When I get in the space, literally, I literally got a circle of folks around me. When I get in the space to where I feel like I want to talk about this with you all, I will, because it's not my job to educate you about the things that have happened over the past years and centuries and decades, et cetera, et cetera. You have to take that upon yourself, just how I had to go and research myself with regards to the correct African-American history that I needed to be learning ever since I was a young buck. Right, that I was robbed of because of the school systems that I had been in. So you have to create these different boundaries. You have to create these stern boundaries for yourself so you don't overexert yourself at the workspace to where you can't give your best outside of the workspace, which you're mostly where you're needed mostly there versus inside your 9 to 5. So I think that it's just very important that setting those firm boundaries for individuals so they'll know when or when not to. You know what I'm saying? And I think that if you start with doing that because you owe it to yourself, if you love yourself enough, you would do such. And then more importantly, if you don't want to kill nobody and go to jail, then you'll definitely do that. So boundaries, create boundaries.
We're going to go to O next. Go ahead, O.
And I am so excited. I was yelling from my screen. Yatu Sabe. Okay, so real quick. So it's funny because I heard Keith Scott's name mentioned. So quick backstory, friends. I used to work for a local newsroom here. I was a reporter producer. I covered the Keith Scott shooting. I was the youngest producer. I was the youngest reporter. You guys, literally after that coverage, I quit shortly thereafter. I could not believe the conversations I was hearing. I could not believe how we took blanketed terms and terminology, flipped it, and made it what the media was saying. So that was that aspect to it too. Not to mention, as an Afro-Latina, here I am. I'm like, how am I standing for the culture if I continue to promote what is being said? And a lot of this cannot be proven. So there's a few things to answer the question, and I'm going to just go down a list. So first thing is, don't allow there to be a promo for your culture. Here's what that means. Don't be the designated Black person to explain things. And for all my beautiful white friends on here, listen, do your research. Instead of asking, hey, matter of fact, let me go to Google and let me see, okay, why is this a frustration? Why is this a problem? Because to be honest with you all, we're tired. We can't answer no more questions. And we don't want to give you this work. I love you. We don't want to give you this work. We don't want to drag you by accident because it's Monday. I didn't have coffee. I didn't have my tea and I didn't do my meditation. Yum yore ke cure. Okay. So I need you to pull up to Google. I need you to do your research because I cannot be the promo for the culture. I'm fighting and my experience is different daily. So that's the first thing. Second is address what you hear. To my beautiful white friends on this. Listen, you hear the things we don't. Let's be real quick. There's some things that you hear. There's some things that they say, oh, I didn't mean to necessarily say it that way. You have to stand in the gap. Help us carry this cross and say, whoa, that's not funny. Or, whoa, what did you mean by that? Begin to challenge your colleagues because here's what's happening. What we're seeing in real time is an accumulation of things that were going unchecked. Right. So it's the water thing conversations. It's the coffee conversations. It's the lunchroom discussions that are being unchecked. So what's happening is a lot of these narratives are not only being created, but disseminated in media. And how I know? I worked in it. Right. So that's another thing. And also mental health is so real. I mean it when I said, you guys, and Perrine is one of my really, really good friends. She'll tell you, I quit the newsroom. I said, I'm going to die here. After coverage, I broke out in hives. I broke down to my mom. I literally could not. I couldn't, like, literally, when I tell you guys, they put me on meds. And my doctor was like, oh, hey, I've never seen you in such a state. What's going on? And I was just like, it's this stuff. It's this stuff. And then I'm hearing some of what my colleagues are saying, and they're asking me questions, and I'm tired. I don't want to answer, but I don't want to pop off. What is it? And my doctor was like, you know what? I'm writing you out. Best thing that he did for me, because I quit. Now I have my own show and I pop my own shit. Right? So I say all that to say that you got to use your influence for bigger than you, but also addressing these things in your own sphere. You know what you hear, you know what you see. And now's the time more than ever for us to go check these things, because this is how bigger problems come up and also how they continue. But I still got hope, though. I still got hope. Love y'all.
Yes. I want to give a quick, I have to piggyback off of what O said just now. And Alicia mentioned this in the comments. I have a degree in broadcast journalism. I did not continue my journalist journey. It was not for me. But what we have to also give grace to journalists, reporters, the trauma that they are facing on a daily basis in and out. When you even want to talk about this pandemic, okay, we can turn off CNN, right? We can turn off CNBC, we can turn off the news, we can mute people on Twitter, all the things. But our journalists are people who are actually reporting this every day. They are in it every day, physically in it. And there is no way that it is mentally sustainable without help. And unfortunately, for so many journalists, especially Black journalists, you have to advocate for yourself. If you're not advocating for yourself and for the mental health that you deserve, so many are either going to burn out, they're going to quit, they're going to not even continue going in the path like I did, or worse. And so I had to give that shout out, and I had to speak to our journalists, our reporters. Please pour into them. Those are some essential workers. Those are some Black people who are constantly literally on the front lines and constantly having to deal with trauma every single day. So please pray for journalists, pour into them. And just everything else. I mentioned advocating for yourself. Ohavia was on a recent podcast of mine and my boyfriend called The Quarantine Couch. We're talking about being your own plug. What's so unfortunate about just all of the times is that often there are not going to be coworkers that are going to show up for you. They're not going to be coworkers that are going to pull up for you. And so often Black people not only have to carry this heavy load, but we have to advocate for ourselves. And yes, it is tiring. It is taxing. It's emotionally exhausting. Period. And you have business resource groups, like one of our gentlemen, our panelists said, that can be an amazing outlet. And it can be something that you can, again, create community and enforce change. I'm not going to down that. I was a part of our Black business resource group, our young professionals business resource group. I was the chair of that. But it was bigger to me in order to use that platform to ensure that Black History Month could be celebrated, to ensure that Black customers and consumers felt represented. So it's just important to, if there is no space, create the space. If no one is advocating for you, unfortunately, we have to do it ourselves. But like everyone has said here today, self-care and taking care of your mental health, your emotional well-being is also, like, I think, top priority.
So JT, can I hop in real quick? All right, so a couple of things. So what Ohavia was talking about, those water cooler comments and everything, we now have a name for those. It's called microaggressions. And it's something that we all experience. It's the little comments of, oh, you speak so well. Oh, we have a corporate basketball game. Would you please play with the rest of us? Little things like that just reinforce kind of everything that's in the larger culture. And those have actual mental health consequences. And so that's something that can detract from your job and really put you in a position that other colleagues don't really have to worry about and kind of go with. One thing I want to encourage everybody to do is take all of your vacation days. Because culturally, as Americans, we don't do that because of the way that just kind of work is built in, and just, in this capitalist society, our value is reflected in more than just our salary, but how much we can work. And so that's one area where Black folks aren't the only ones that wear the badge of suffering as currency. And just a very practical thing when we talked about navigating white spaces, the same way we're saying know your rights in the street, know your rights in your office. So that means being aware of what's in your contract and what is the HR policies. Because usually that is kind of how you can get recourse and a lot of systematic ways to get support. And also practically email and document everything, every conversation you have with people, every interaction, just so that way you're not in a situation where it's your word against theirs. Because it is very hard to try and prove that you've been discriminated against or wronged if you don't have any concrete paperwork. And I know for a lot of people, that's the only way you can get recourse or justice in your kind of corporate office.
What I was going to say is that I'm someone who really is prideful when it comes to authenticity. And in certain white spaces, I know I cannot operate, mainly because while being extremely intelligent, I'm not a fan of speaking in standard English for an extremely long period of time. It feels absolutely uncomfortable. Now, if I'm talking about something complex, I may start in standard English just to have a general, hey, here's this complex topic. Let me say it in general terms. And then I completely break it down and just say it in regular old hood nigga speech, because that's actually how I'm processing this complex information that I'm reading in order to go back and teach someone else about it, because it may be of service to them. I think that when we're in white spaces, I agree with the history before us, brother. We do have to set boundaries. I understand that no matter what job I work, I'm going to go with a smile on my face every day because I love listening to music before I go to work. However, the many microaggressions that you go through while at work drive me insane to where I have to approach petty from another perspective. So when we get into these very close situations with some folk and they say nigga, I politely say in a very petty way, oh my God, I am not your safe Negro. So let's try this one more time. Because I'm going to do my best the older I get to operate in God's grace. It's just, I'm operating in God's grace, but my mouth might be another kind of way. And as I get older, I still have to take care of my child. And then on top of that, I am going to get older. I refuse to live a life where I think that it's going to end tomorrow. And yes, you're right. That is an HR complaint. But what I love is the fact of just sunning you right there in a way that you cannot come back to me for. You can go to HR all you want to. And if there is no documentation, nobody else heard it, because trust and do believe I sat around and thought about how petty I could be and execute my pettiness and then dip out quickly because I don't want to deal with the fallout. I will. But I refuse to be not me. I have no problems compromising for the sake of professionalism. I do think that there's a line right there, especially with certain things that you do. I choose art because art allows me to do whatever I want to do and justify it in their language based on the amount of debt I'm in from their education of the Western art canon, while having to then educate myself on modern and contemporary Black artists, only to go back and teach Asian students how to display their identity in the art world. No. After all that work, I don't have patience for white spaces, but I'll always compromise and I'll work with you, but never will I work for you again.
I've always approached the job or the workforce as being a fuckboy. You have to set your boundaries early on so you don't end up getting screwed over in the end. People receive you and treat you in a very specific way if they know they can get away with it. So when I show up to the first day on the job in a black t-shirt that has a panther on it, and I let everybody know I'm just going to keep my headphones on and do my job. I'm not coming to the potluck. Don't expect me to stay here too much longer after work. I'm here to do my hours and that's it. I appreciate your invite to the party, but I'm not coming. I don't have an issue with you. It's just, I don't want work getting into my actual life because I am not my job. You are your job, but I'm not my job. Now, will you have friends at work? Probably not, but you don't care about them anyway. And if those people are racist, if they didn't like you, they don't care for Black folk, guess what? You being there or not being there is not going to change that. So don't sacrifice your health, your mental health, your well-being to try to please some people that aren't going to care about you at all. You drop dead, they're replacing you tomorrow. That's the bottom line, right? So don't get into a relationship with a fuckboy knowing that he's going to cheat on you and he's going to call your homegirls for interviews and stuff. And you're going to refer to all your friends to his little funky ass house and stuff. And here you are on the house, man, because you done got fired, you done got dropped. And everybody else over there having fun in the company cafe, eating Karen's a potluck dish, knowing the cat been up on the counter. Now, I'm talking from a personal experience, but I'm just saying, don't sell yourself short. Be unapologetically Black and let them know you're unapologetically Black. They'll change. They'll get with it. And if not, you're ready to file that lawsuit. It's cool.
Amen, Pastor. So real quick, friends. So Phil said something that was so very essential. And this is also related to my experience. So when I left, HR reached out and asked me why. I never had any marks on my record. I wasn't one pulled in the office often. I wasn't one pulled in the office at all, right? Clean record at the workplace. They asked me, why did I leave? You guys, no cap. I could show it to you. I had a 100-page, catch this, 100-page document of everything that happened to me from when I began to work there. And there were a couple from when I was interning. HR called me and was like, we're sorry, how can we fix it? I said, I'm not interested, right? So what I definitely will say is on both ends of the spectrum for Black and brown and also for our beautiful white friends, listen, here's the thing. You know what you see. Can you document it? So say we quit and we out, because they'll take that paperwork and correlate a lot of the facts because it happened to me. I need you guys to speak up. It's about bearing the cross, helping us carry it because it's essential. 100 pages, no cap, I promise you.
Cool. Go ahead, Dr. Bell.
one of the things we're going to say real quick, because sometimes you just can't let certain things slide, right? But you have to be professional about not letting it slide. Just because, if people get the feeling that they could say and do anything to you, they'll try it. So you kind of have to be like Babyface in that versus battle with Teddy Riley and politely slip talk him. He was the most disrespectful person I'd ever seen in my life. So there's some lessons that can be learned from that elder, right? 2, HR exists to protect the company. HR exists to reduce the liability of the company, right? So when you see HR siding with someone in a workplace dispute, it's because the person against whom they judged is putting the company at risk through their behavior, right? So you do have to keep receipts. The third thing, and this is where some of the white folk who are on the call can be useful. The brother was talking about microaggressions, right? And it's a concept that's been around since the 70s, but it saw a resurgence in the last decade and a half because of incidents on college campuses, especially, right? And in the workplace. But there's also something called the microappreciation. I can't tell you how many times I've said something in a faculty meeting as an untenured faculty member and now as a full professor, where in the moment I heard something. And I'm texting a sister friend or a brother friend on the faculty, and they're like, yo, did you hear what I just heard? And I'm like, okay, I wasn't tripping. I did hear what I just heard. And then I say something. And people will walk it back, and then someone will send me an email or talk to me after the meeting. I really agree with what you said. And I'm like, yo, then stand with me in the moment and co-sign, right? Or rather than waiting for me to be the person to speak out on it, if you heard it and you know what you heard, you can speak up on it without me having to take the initiative, right? And so that's something where when I think about my dearest white friends in life, they've always done that with me, right? They've either stood with me or they've stood in front of me. And that's where the friendships matter most. But for those of us, remember, at work, there are people you work with that can become friends over time. But at first, you have coworkers. You don't have friends. Friendship is earned through trust and time. But in the meantime, you can stand up for what's right when you know what's wrong.
Cool. Ooh, that was a good one. That was a good one. The next question that we have is, can we touch on the phrase, this was said earlier during our discussion, can we touch on the phrase, all skin folk ain't kinfolk? How to cope with families and friends that try to deter or silence activism. This can also be for our white friends too, because I'm pretty sure you have a lot of friends and a whole lot of family members who are telling you that you just need to shut the hell up and don't worry about it because it's not your problem. So the question again is, touch on the all skin folk ain't kinfolk phrase. How to cope with family friends that try to deter or silence activism. Go ahead. Oh, I got you.
Oh, my bad. I was like, present. All right. So no lies, friends. I started doing a series of lives called The Decode, where we take this thing from specifically a media and influential standpoint when we talk platforms on social media, because that's my jam. And I have had family members from New York tell me, just stop. You're doing too much. I don't want nobody mad at you. And I've even had a family member tell me like, hey, listen, can you kind of tweak a little bit of your narrative when you go live and, make sure to say all lives matter real quick. Or can you throw this in? And it became language that became appeasing to those who were watching the live, right? So I think that all skin folk and not kinfolk is pretty much a colloquialism for, listen, your people ain't your people. Or simply put, you can't go with what the narrative is all the time. When everybody zig, you zag. Somebody got to stand for something, or else what we're currently fighting will continue. And again, it goes back to the hope that I have. How I'm keeping it is because guess what? As we were on this panel and a little bit before, there were 4 officers that were arrested in addition to everything that's going on. So I'm celebrating that because that means that something we're doing is working, right? But I will say this, don't tell us that. Don't tell us how to do it. Don't tell us how to pull up. Don't tell us how to engage. Now's the time more than ever. Let us talk how we talk. Let us walk it out how we walk it out. But understand, a lot of people ain't your people. And I'm sure a lot of people on this panel are seeing that. I'm sure you have unfollowed somebody this week. Matter of fact, I'm so sorry, not unfollowed somebody, a couple people. I'm sure that you have hung up on a family member or a friend. I'm sure that there is somebody who completely showed their ass and you was like, wait, where is this coming from? What is this energy? And for some, it made us sad because these were people who was rocking with us. We talking as far back as high school to now. Some of these people are probably our children's godparents. Some of these people are people who, like when we was graduating, it was cool, but now I got to stand for this. And it's like, relax, Ohavia, or relax, insert your name. All people aren't your people. You decide, will you unfollow and keep the trend going, or what is it that you're going to be doing? Because again, that cross comes on you. What are you going to do?
I want to I just want to play devil's advocate, sort of, and say that it's kind of harsh to say all skin folk aren't kinfolk, because that comes from a place of like, during slavery, you really had to like play down your intelligence and your courage and your bravery just to survive. So I'm not going to say that every Black person out here is cooning for the sake of appeasing master. Sometimes it's just like this trauma that's embedded in your DNA that forces you to, without thinking, say, I would never vote for Obama, they're going to kill him, right? So it's sort of like this backwards way of thinking, like, if I don't participate, or if I keep my nephew from going out in the streets, I'm helping to preserve his life. I'm helping to keep him safe. And it's sort of a hard position to be in as a Black person, to know that being braggadocious can sometimes mean a bullet, but also being passive can also mean a bullet. So you're ultimately damned if you do, damned if you don't. For me personally, like, if niggas is shooting, I just might as well be as loud as I want to be. But that doesn't work for everybody.
I mean, going with Wesley's point, so the point of, I feel like there are two different ways to approach it, because what Ohavia brought up was basically somebody who is actively trying to silence you versus somebody who is kind of approaching things from a different perspective. With Wesley's example, I'm going to say it's implied that there's a different level of intimacy in that relationship. And so, you're not always able to just cut off people. And so in those cases, when it comes to protecting, just kind of your spirit, endurance, and everything else, you just got to realize there are certain things I cannot talk to this person about. And that's fine. So you don't have to mute the person, but you can mute certain conversations. And that's definitely a way to go about it. And the unfortunate thing is, honestly, putting new boundaries on people is hard. It's something that we have been conditioned to not do, when it comes to a family system and everything else. I'm a part of a podcast called The Charting Room, and I can think of at least 3 or 4 episodes where we've talked about different boundaries, different ways to kind of maintain your peace, whether it's family relationships. We did one about going home for Thanksgiving. We did one about mother-daughter relationships. It's something that we're not conditioned to do, and especially when people who are close to us, because a part of the relationship is less boundaries than you would have in other places. And so when you try and put those up, it's not just exhausting for you, but a lot of times the person, whether they're conscious of it or not, are actively trying to tear those down and get back to where you were. And so that's something where you have to be intentional about it and mindful about it if you can be, and just realize, like, you don't necessarily have to cancel somebody, but you can change the channel or take a break every now and again.
And I think that also, lends itself to making sure that you meet people where they at. There's some people in my family that the only thing we share is DNA. We share the same blood. That's it. Our ideologies are completely opposite. I have a cousin right now who is a pro-Trump supporter, and I'm not trying to bring in politics, but I'm not on that train. I don't love her any less. However, she's just not my cup of tea when it comes to politics, right? And I think that we have to learn how to categorize people. We have to know where to put people we have to know which specific category we need to put them in, right? Whether it's a category to where you can talk politics with them, you can talk sports with them, you can talk community with them. You have to be the decider with regards to where you place these individuals in your life. Because the fact of the matter is, if we cancel everybody, then it's going to be a lonely island and you'll be out there by yourself. You know what I'm saying? So I think that you still have to be conscious with regards to who has your best interests or who have some commonalities. The more and more that we mature in life, the more and more we evolve, knowing when to pull certain elements of that away, because just because they started with you doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to end with you. You know what I'm saying? So just kind of making sure that you are the decider with regards to who gets your good energy and who doesn't. And making sure that you're not wasting energy in certain situations to where that person's never going to evolve to where you have. And again, that doesn't mean you have to completely disassociate yourself with them. It's just you have to put people in categories. So I think sometimes, the phrase of meeting people where they're at, sometimes you have to do the same thing with family members as well.
I totally agree with that.
Hold on. Sorry, Dr. Dr. Velcat is a thumb up. So we're going to go to Dr. Bill.
To get into all skin folk and kinfolk, I'm going to go to the Book of Outcasts, chapter Equimini. And, is every brother with dreads down for the cause? Is every brother with gold down for the fall? No, so don't get caught up in appearances. And that's kind of what it comes to, right? That when you suggest that all skin folk ain't your kinfolk, it comes back to that point of the diversity of the African American community. Just because we have certain phenotypical characteristics in common doesn't mean that we share politics, doesn't mean that we're all trying to dismantle systems of oppression. And you just have to recognize that, right? And this is where I turn to another elder that's gone on really to join the ancestors. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. As simple as that. It doesn't take long to figure that out. You get a vibe, trust yourself.
I didn't know.
It took us long
I didn't know if Professor Belt was done
first
or
of
not.
all, Dr. Belt stole my intro.
Wait, Carla.
Go ahead, Perrine.
Go ahead, Perrine.
Oh man, the struggle. Well, okay, so I didn't know that Professor Dr. Belt was done or not. It was very much so just like mic drop. Thank you. As a first generation American, being Liberian American specifically, I know for a fact that on my spectrum, if I even were to put like my siblings and I on like a spectrum from like liberal and conservative, I'm probably the most liberal and I'm the youngest of 6. And I know for a fact when communicating with my family and discussing everything from politics to racial inequality, after spending the past week with my mom as things were happening back in Greensboro, I had to take a step back because I'm, frustrated, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm raving. And I'm telling my mom that, when I get back to Charlotte, like I'm protesting, I'm doing this and all these things. And like her eyes are just like swelling. And she's just like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you doing? And it is something that I was at first like, mama, like, let's break it down. Let's break down the facts. Let's break down racial inequality, et cetera. But what I had to do and what we keep talking about is empathy. I had to reconsider the trauma that my mother has faced. My mom comes from Liberia, like I said, a war-torn country where in Liberia you had free Black slaves that went back to not colonize, but to give structure to a country. I have ancestors that were those Black Americans that went back. You have a civil war. You have a country that I went to in 2018 where the White House is still completely dismantled. It's not functioning because it was burned in the 80s with the entire presidential administration. And I had to then, like what we're just saying, meet people in the middle, right? You have to think about the trauma, but then you also have to continuously educate and show perspective. And so it's definitely something that for me is very deep. But I know for a fact that I don't give up on my family members. I continuously am showing them more and more things and trying to continuously evolve their perspectives, but as well empathize with the trauma and things that they've experienced in the past. So the Black experience is complex because at the end of the day, no one's going to stop my brother or my nephew and say, oh, wait, they're African. That doesn't happen. So throw that entire ideal out the window. You're Black. Period.
Are we good on that one? Did we touch all subjects with that one? Cool. All right. So the next one is
you done moved on.
Oh, we gotta move on, Carla. It's okay. So we gonna
let's move on.
Yeah. Sorry, girl, but I'm pretty sure, Carla, you'll be able to talk about this one. This one's a little bit heavy. It says, do we have any tips on how to address this topic with young children? How do we explain racism and the Black Lives Matter movement to small children who may not understand what is going on? So that question again is, do we have any tips on how to address this topic with young children? How do we explain racism and the Black Lives Matter movement to small children who may not understand what is going on? How young? They didn't give an actual age. I'm going to say maybe like, let's keep it like primary, like elementary school. Or you can go to all ages if you want to say middle school. I say maybe like that. Whatever. Use your discernment.
All right. So one thing. So here's the deal. One, that level of teaching, like on a professional level, is something that's been in existence for 20 years. And one of the most popular publications that reflect teaching tolerance is a publication called Teaching Tolerance. And they also have lesson plans readily available on their website that anybody could use. And just think of a lesson plan as a general structure. You may not be an actual teacher, but looking at how someone would teach a small child the complexity of racism, it gets extremely heavy. So with little ones like naturally just don't give a damn. Like if you look the same height as them, kind of have the same language as them, they all roll together and then they just be like a little crew. But it's not until the parent says, oh, you are this or that, does the child have a new level to their identity, especially when they're growing. And identity is something that children develop year after year after year after year. Every year it's something new. The downside is what I see disguised in that question for me that I'm interpreting is, how am I going to tell my child, number one, that he's Black? He think everybody damn brown. But when I go to describe the weight of that conversation, I need to understand who he is and not scare him to death and not make him feel like he's inferior, but to let him know that he's the greatest person ever. And this is our home. And in our home, we celebrate these things. And when it's you and I and we leave our home, we're going to go check out some other stuff that's also cool, just so I know that my child will become a very well-rounded individual. Downside, though, is that I don't know the time or day that his feelings are going to get hurt because of a racial epithet. Something like calling him a nigga, calling him a monkey, so on and so forth, having somebody beyond me to say that he is less than. What I will not do is teach hate, but what I will do on a few different levels is tell children that it's cool to play with each other, but also correct the wrong. I had an incident in class one time where one of my Black girls looked at one of my Asian kids and called him a Chinaman. First of all, you hang out with old Black people because you're too old to know what that word is. Only old Black people say that. Second of all, the way you just said that to him is no different than him calling you a nigger. So when I go to teach, I'm going to call out the bad. You do not get a pass just because you Black and you Latino like me. No, you don't get a pass. Everybody gonna get this clarity. But I start with my child first and letting him know that you're a pretty brown and I'm a pretty brown. And look at this whole world full of pretty brown people. And as the topic gets more and more complex, if you truly know kids or your kids, you'll be able to figure out in just a regular language the right things to say. But if you absolutely do not know where to start, then teaching tolerance is a great way of starting because they do not play. This is what they do on a daily basis, which is get educators to understand that your classroom is beyond diverse. You're going to have different children in there. To be honest, Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools is what they label a minority majority school system, AKA very hyper segregated across majority of the schools. You have a 40 to 50 to 60 percentile of Black children, a 20 to 30, 40 percentile of Latino children, and then the numbers fill themselves in on the way down, with the next largest population being specifically Southeast Asian students. So those are Vietnamese children, our Hmong children, our Cambodian kids. All of these types of folk exist in this space. And if you don't know how to talk about tolerance in a way to a young person, I think it would be best to read about it in a dictionary, because I can't read complex things without a dictionary myself, and figure out, if I have to share this with an 8-year-old, what would I say?
Yeah, Carla, 100% I agree. But also, in addition to everything that Carla said, like doing your research and knowing what it really is, the facts with your school system, where your child goes, ask your child, like, what are some things that you're hearing? Let me tell y'all something. Children will snitch. Children will Cameron. Cameron is a colloquialism for telling on people. But children will definitely tell you. And I think that a tip that everybody can take away is asking your children, the kids in the neighborhood, if you know, like, I'm not a parent, but asking the kids in your neighborhood, asking your siblings, asking the children who are around you. Case in point, yesterday, I went to a demonstration and I took 2 of my brothers. I have 3, but I took 2. I took the 15 and 21-year-old. And they asked me to go. And I was like, I'm not going to say no. This is history in the making. You know what I'm saying? So they went with me. We was out there, you guys, literally for hours. When we got in the car, the 15-year-old was like, wow. And I said, okay, talk to me about what you're feeling. And he was honest. He was like, I can't right now. Like, I can't put it in words. Can we try tomorrow over dinner? And so today, just before we hopped on this panel, we talked a little bit about it yesterday with my mom's experiences included. But what I will say is a tip that everybody can use on this panel is ask your children. Ask children around you, because they will tell you. And what I love about a child is the purity. They're honest. They're like, this is what I heard. What is it? And now's the time that we can tell our kids, like, hey, I know this is what you heard. Let's talk about it. What I will say don't do is don't put the news on. Kids will be all over like, let's not do that. We don't want to traumatize our children. We want to teach them. We don't want to traumatize. We want to teach. And how you do that is you bring yourself to their level with the experience that they have, and you break it down where they can understand, right? So that's a tip we can take away. And also, how do we explain racism and the Black Lives Matter movement to small children who may not understand what's going on? Again, do your research. And here's how that looks. To be honest, there's really no way to explain to a child, a baby, in their most purest form, racism. How do you say to a child, like, okay, so there's these group of people, and then there's these group of people. These group of people think they're better. And a child will be like, why? Because they have friends and their experiences in the classroom is inclusive, right? Depending on the schools that they go to. I don't want to blanket it. There's some schools where they're like, you know, it's regular, like they're with everybody. But at the same time, what I will say is you want to be careful with how you do it. You want to be sensitive. Ask them what they already know and build upon it. But to be honest, there's no rule book on parenting. There's no rule book on explaining these painful aspects of our world to our youth. So you just got to meet them where they are and do the best you can, man. I mean, how do you? How do you? Because these are things that are painful to discuss. Thank you, guys.
Go ahead, Dr. Belt.
I posted some links in the group chat as the sisters and brothers were breaking down, approaching the topic. And this is being recorded. You can have a transcript of the group chat, and it'll have those things for you that are looking for some stuff to get in the hands of your children. As far as operationalizing this, though, this is really hard because, you know, my 2 children sort of peeked in at different points in the call. My daughter will turn 7 next month. My son is 5.5. These children, the world to them is sunshine and rainbows and glitter, and everything is good and right. And I want to let them ride that as long as they can, right? Because, you know, I grew up in East New York during the crack era and police violence and everything else, right? And at 7, I had a boot string with a key around my neck, and I was ripping and running around Cypress Hills housing projects. My children don't have that worldly awareness, but they are super intelligent. They have a super intelligence because their world has been about books and learning and being good persons, being good citizens, right? I had to do that and learn the street in order to survive. So when it comes to teaching race, you know, every once in a while, I'll just say something to them like, y'all know we Black, right? And then I'm trying to introduce it, especially as my child has gone from a situation where the daycare teachers and the people who own the daycare were mostly African American, to a situation now where she's one of 2 Black children in the room. There are a couple of Latinx children. There might be some Asian and Pacific Islander children. And then the majority is white, and a strong majority is white, right? So with Black History Month, they'll bring things home and I'll say, hey, well, you know, I'll add to it as an African American studies educator, right? My daughter had an assignment during President's Week where they had to learn something about George Washington, and it's like right backs about George Washington. The last fact I made her write down was he owned people against their will, and that was wrong. So it starts in those ways. And the cool thing about those books, the books are conversation starters for you. The books can help you to get into the conversation where the children can encounter people and characters that look like themselves, and they can also encounter difference and understand that different doesn't mean inferior.
Can I say that? Okay. But yeah, so one thing is, I want to say kids are extremely perceptive. And so a lot of times, I've found when I work with parents, when I work with kids, parents are waiting for things to be verbalized before it's kind of real and they understand what's going on. But kids have a concept of racial identity pretty early on. And so from there, it's kind of cemented through those experiences later on. And so by the time we get to the proverbial conversation that people have with their kids during their teenage years of how to, interact with police and everything, all of that has been reinforced. It's not called white supremacy because somebody is, dropping N-bombs at daycare. It's because of every message that's reinforced in larger culture. And so on top of that, I always find it odd when we try and figure out how to talk to our kids about racism because it's from a defensive position. But on the other side, from the offensive position, they are letting it fly from the beginning, And so while it might not always come out necessarily in the sandbox, it can come out in different ways. And now, thankfully, you don't have, I guess you could say, explicitly segregated places, but, kids kind of pick up on these differences. And I think a lot of times it's difficult because from the adult perspective, you're bringing all of this experience, some of it not very positive. And so you want to make sure your kids are prepared. And so you're trying to bring the culmination of your life experiences to this little life, and that can be overwhelming. And so you got to kind of dial it back a bit. And so I always just encourage parents to more so ask questions and see where the kid is and see what they want to know. And that lets you know kind of what they're thinking about and then go from there. If somebody comes up and says, "Mommy, what's racism?" And it's like, the cop's going to kill you. It's like, no, somebody mentioned it. It's like, wait a minute. Okay. And another thing is, I think a lot of times we have to realize that our own experiences will not necessarily happen to our children. Because I've seen a lot of parents put a lot of restrictions on their kids, not based on the kid's behavior, not based on the kid's actual temperament, but based on the parents' experiences. And unfortunately, that spills over, and you have some kids who are anxious, some kids who are way more restricted than they could have been, not based on their own experiences.
Nice. All right, guys. What we're gonna do now, it's already 9:22. We've had such a good discussion. It doesn't seem like it's really 9:22, but we're going to open the floor for 3 more questions from you guys. If you have a question, it's about to be luck of the draw right now with me. May the odds be ever in your favor. Put a thumbs up. I will tap you and you will be unmuted and you can ask your question to the panel. 3, 2, 1, go. If you have a question, put a thumbs up. If you have a question, put a thumbs up. This is the last call. Ooh, you guys are quiet. No question? Wow. Okay, question right here, right? Will. And B. White, Brian Kurt White, and then Rochelle. So we're going to go with Will, B. White, and then Rochelle.
Hello, everybody. So I'm actually asking a question coming from YouTube. So the question was, as a white artist, I wanted to use my platform and voice to create art that is impactful and meaningful. Is creating tribute portraits to raise awareness or art addressing police brutality and other racial inequality issues exploitative? How can I be a better ally using my art platform? Let me know if I need to say it again.
We got you, Will. That was a good question.
Will, can you say it just one more time? Just one more. Thank you.
Okay. So, as a white artist, I want to use my platform and voice to create art that is impactful and meaningful. Is creating tribute portraits to raise awareness or art addressing police brutality and other racial inequality issues exploitative? How can I be a better ally using my art platform?
Could I tap on that real quick, JT? Okay, so here's what I will say. To me, it only begins to get exploitive when you charge and hold the bread. It only begins to get like that when you're charging, you're making money, and then like it's going back in your bank account. Here's what I would definitely recommend is, yes, use your voice. Yes, use your talent, your gift and abilities. But whatever money you make, or if people want to donate or sow into you, put it back into like the Minnesota Relief Fund. Put it back into like Charlotte bail funds. Put it back into those links. Also, blacklivesmatter.com is a whole thing. They have chapters. We don't have one here in North Carolina. I looked this morning, but they have chapters that you could sow into that are close to us, or like just the overall cause. So I will say, no, and this is just Ohavia's perspective. I think that it's a beautiful thing that you want to show your solidarity through your art. But remember, don't charge and hold that bread and go pay your rent. That's very disrespectful. Don't pay that car note. Put it back into the efforts that we are fighting for. That's how you truly do it. And that was just my perspective.
Can I hop in?
Yeah, go Phil, and then we're gonna go Dammit.
Okay, so I'm into art as an appreciator, and so I echo Ohavia's points, but not just in the kind of monetary aspect, but from the creative aspect, because I know a lot of times artists kind of create things and let people draw their own conclusions to it. But I feel like even though your work speaks for itself, you can speak for your work. And I think if you're doing this to intentionally elevate voices, then say that. There's a gentleman out of Brooklyn named Tim Akamura. He actually has a lot of images that people have seen. And so not only does he make these images, but he speaks about his intentionality and putting that forward. And to go to Ohavia's point, there's actually another artist, white artist. His name's Trevor Andrew. His nickname is Trouble Andrew. Just today, he dropped a print. So he has this whole Gucci Go series, and it literally had a actual collaboration with Gucci, but he dropped one today. It was kind of the image, and it had a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on it. He sold out, made a quick 50,000, and he was like, look, all of this is going towards these three organizations. And so I think if you're going to be an ally, it's not something that should be implied, it's not something that should be inferred, it's something that should be explicit, because I think standing boldly in that is a part of the, pulling up that we've been talking about this whole time.
All right, so real quick, because it's late. If you have the platform, if you're an artist, you have a big platform, we as Black people don't necessarily need you to do the work for us. You can work in ways to amplify our voice. I can tell my own story. I appreciate that you want to tell my story. You can co-sign the story. But if you have the platform, let me use the platform. It's that simple. We don't need a white savior. We don't need white Jesus to come and save us from all the big bad wolves that are out there. We can defend ourselves. We like to defend ourselves. But if you want to make art that appreciates Black people and Black bodies, do that. But also, if you can, lift up another Black artist, somebody who's actually experiencing that, get eyeballs on them, get money into their pockets, let them tell their story via your platform or through your resources, your tools, whatever you got, y'all hold the keys. We just trying to get up in here and make some noise real quick.
Right.
Deuces. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Black bodies have been exploited. Black intellectual property has been exploited for so many centuries, and without any type of reciprocity. It's been taken advantage of for so long that other folks from other races, they become so embedded and so enamored with our art, with how we represent culture, with how we consistently evolve style, music, et cetera, et cetera. And it's been time for people to get their just due. It's been time for it. So right now, if you're in the space, like the brother was just saying, to where you have a platform, you got to bring somebody on. You got to have co-signers. You got to have skin in the game as well. It's not right that somebody goes out there, puts cornrows in their hair, white female, and wears Timberlands, steals our whole swag, and they're on the next week they're on the cover of Vogue or what have you, and say, oh yeah, this was all my idea. No, it wasn't actually. This was completely fabricated and stolen from Black folks, right? Because we're trendsetters, and that's what we do. So because that's what we do, you have to have skin in the game, and you have to be vetted by people that that don't look like you, that are part of that culture, that says, you know what, this is okay, or that's not okay. Or if you're going to do such, a certain percent of this proceed should go to this place to help enhance it. Like he said, we can do it ourselves. We've been doing it ourselves. We are the best built people to do it ourselves. We have the most dexterity from a mental standpoint to withstand whatever and to create and do for ourselves. However, if you're not walking into that lane with skin in the game, then it makes it very difficult. I want to say specifically, if you all haven't seen it, a good friend of mine, Chris Everett, documentarian as well, the film Wilmington on Fire, discusses the 1898 massacres in Wilmington, North Carolina. Wilmington, North Carolina was it in the southeastern part of the United States after the emancipation of slavery. You had white folks going to physicians. You had white folks going to black pawn shops. You had white folks going to dentists, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, white supremacists came and destroyed the whole town and really kind of set the bar with regards to all these different massacres that happened afterwards. Well, since the release of that documentary, which was roughly in 2016, I think that documentary was released, man, you've had literature all over the globe discussing it. And I was talking with them yesterday and I said, yo, are people reaching out to you? You know, are they doing X, Y, and Z? I had him on my Facebook Live feed for History Before Us. And he's like, you know what? No, but you know what? X, Y, and Z. I'm coming out with a part 2. I'm coming out with a part 3. It's in the works right now. And, you know, eventually everything will work out, et cetera, et cetera. But the majority of the individuals that are doing this were white individuals. And they were literally utilizing the hard work and the research that he put into this documentary to galvanize their pieces of literature. And of course, that's going to piss us off. You know what I'm saying? So you got to have skin in the game. You have to allocate some of those earnings to the cause. And I think that yes, we do need everybody to be able to contribute to in some way, shape, or form. But you got to pay up, whether it's with your time or whether it's from a monetary standpoint. So that's my personal opinion.
So I come at this as a different type of creative, right? Because I kind of help to create knowledge and interpret things. Some of the most important scholarship in African American studies and African American history has been written by white people. C. Van Woodward wrote one of the best accounts of Jim Crow, the strange career of Jim Crow, right? That launched a whole lot of subsequent research. And so I think then that there's a space for sincere people who are not Black to engage, think about, reflect on, write about the Black experience. And so what does that then require of people? It requires people to respect the source and to acknowledge the bridge, right? That as a social scientist, if all you do is look at the Black community as a set of subjects, but then you don't put the findings from that research to work to help improve people's lives, then all you've been is a taker and you haven't given anything back. So you can be inspired by, you can work with, you can advocate for, but don't just be a taker. Be someone that makes a contribution and shows that you're committed to it all, right? And I think others who have spoken before me have laid out some really great specific things that people can do. But I'm always cautious because when kids come to me in Intro to African American Studies, I'm like, being Black doesn't mean you know this like the back of your hand, and being white doesn't mean that you can't learn it because you didn't know about photosynthesis until you sat down, read the book, and took the class. You didn't know about Macbeth novel, read the play, sat down, took the class, right? So you can learn things, you can be a part of it. Just respect it, respect it, treat it like it's worth something.
Cool. Thank you. We're going to go to Bryant White with the question. There you go, brother.
So my question, we hear me? My question is that change, it tends to be partnered with radical movement or even violence. So given where we are now, what is the next step for this movement to lead to a civil war? And do you or do you not agree with that?
Can you repeat it for us one more time? Just one more time.
Absolutely. Change tends to be partnered. Certain change tends to be partnered with a radical movement or even violence. So given where we are now, what's the next step for this to move toward a civil war? And do you or do you not agree with that? And do you or do you not agree with that, rather? I'm sorry.
I can start. Okay, so I do not agree with things going towards a civil war. Just for, if nothing else, I think practically Black folks and the people who are on our side are woefully underarmed for something like that. And I think also under-resourced. Because if you think about it with liberals and everything, culturally, it's more about kind of the moral standpoint and everything else. Most Second Amendment rights are definitely going to be on the right side of things, and a lot of that will be sanctioned by law. Unfortunately, I don't think it takes that much, and I think that is a part of the kind of principle behind nonviolence resistance, not like peaceful protests and everything, because whether you've seen it online or read it, a protest in and of itself is disruptive and it's not peaceful. But a lot of times, all it takes is for the people who are putting forward the message to kind of have that violent reaction, so that way it validates any response, because there's still this concept of law and order, and that goes on. And I remember a book I read, Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. One thing that he said is that the oppressed, or the people on the lower end of things, mistake the amount of force that is used to destroy them as validating their power, while actually all it does is just basically means that you were a threat that had to be eliminated. And so I feel like a lot of times people will take that stance and feel like, oh, well, they had to bring tanks, so that means it's like, no. To also quote the contemporary scholar Andre 3000 from the group Outkast, he says, while we ranting and raving about gas, nigga, they made them gas. They got some shit that'll blow out our back from where they stay at. So I think that's something that also kind of goes into it, and people really don't get that.
Yeah, the last poets had a poem called When the Revolution Comes. And they were like, niggas are scared of revolution. You're not ready for revolution until you're ready to eat rats to survive. And I'm like, I love my people. Rather than dying for my people, I'd rather live for my people, right? Like, our people haven't endured everything that they've endured since we've been brought here for us to just throw it all away, right? During the course of this call, you saw my two children come in, right? And, I was looking at, Andre Harrell passed away, right? He's 59 years old. By the time I'm 59, my son will be about 21, and he will need me more than ever, right? And so my wife needs me to live. My children need me to live. My community needs me to live, right? Enough people have died for our freedom where no one else has to for us to be free. And so while I understand the brother's larger point, everything that's happening now will produce change. Tylisha dropped in the group chat that Breonna's law, which would eliminate these no-knock raids, it's working its way through the legislature. There was a brother that died on the 1st, 2 days ago, David McAtee, in Louisville, the same city, during these demonstrations, right? So their bloodshed and the uproar over their bloodshed is already making a change. I'd rather not more of us die to have the world we want to live in.
Go ahead, Dammit, West, and then we're going to wrap it up with the last question.
All right. I think a lot of us forget why the civil rights movement was so effective. In that being, it was this performative act to show the brutality of your oppressors. And that was in an era where TV was new. So for the first time in every household, you could actually see the violence that you heard about. You could see the racism on display. Not to say that people have become desensitized to racism as of now, but it's painfully obvious that the government or just institutions at large are in the wrong for how they're treating American citizens. And we're lucky enough to have white allies acting as cannon fodder, right? So it hits different when you see a black guy get gunned down the street, used to it. But when you see a pretty blonde girl get her scalp pushed back with a rubber bullet, and now she's out here bleeding in the streets and stuff, right? That's different. So I'm not necessarily saying we have to find ways to weaponize our white allies to not only cause mayhem, but act as human shields. But there will come a time very soon where the average person on the far right says, this is enough. This really doesn't make any sense. This is the waste of my time. I can't get to work. My niece just went outside and now she's been shot by the police. I thought the police were supposed to protect me. This police state is no good. And I'm honestly praying that martial law happens, because the far right's worst fear is the government oversteps all their boundaries and now they're imposing on my freedoms. And I think things need to get to a point where it's not just Black people's problem, but it's everybody's problem. And as I said before, since we're all at home and we're all in this together, this is becoming more of a we problem than an us problem. So just encourage your white friends to just walk out in the streets, use them as shields, put them up front. See that pepper spray come out, pick her up. Let her catch it. That's what
do not pick up and let them catch it. Oh, blessed.
We're going to go to Rochelle. Rochelle has a question. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I also posted my question in the chat because it's kind of long-winded, I guess. But as a Black woman, I see and feel the outrage that people have about the murder of Black men, and unfortunately, the indifference to the murder of Black women. And because of this, I feel we tend to forget what we're fighting for, and we become lost on what to do to save us all. What do you feel is necessary for Black people to reach full liberation?
Can you repeat the end of that question just one more time, Queen?
What do you feel is necessary for Black people to reach full liberation? And yes, I agree. Also, the Black LGBTQ community.
Yes, I was going to tag on to also Black. I mean, everybody Black, trans lives, LGBTQI, all of that.
Yes.
Okay, I guess I started talking first. So it's one of those things where it's always interesting how people get to a point where they can't see past their own privilege. And it's one of those things where, yes, I am Black, but I also happen to be a physician who is a heterosexual, who is a Christian, who at least has relationships with both my parents. And so doing this work that I've been doing as far as mental health, people just really can't see beyond themselves. And you would be surprised how much people don't wonder about themselves, and they're not able to kind of transpose whatever feelings they have to other folks. So for me, anything that I wish a white person would do for me in this large struggle, I should probably do for women and people from the queer community as well. And so I do my best to be intentional about whether it's in mixed company or other company, just kind of bringing up different points of view, checking different comments. And a big thing that I've learned is powerful is amplifying a comment. So not co-opting it, but when a woman brings up a comment or somebody from the queer community brings up a comment, I reflect it back to other people. I use my voice, but I make sure I give credit to the person that said it. So that way we can do it. And I wish I could say I was born like this and just kind of came out this way, but no, it took a lot of correction. It took a lot of reading. It took a lot of people who were gracious enough to be patient with me. And so I try and take that forward, because honestly, if I can't do that, then I don't feel like I have the same right to have somebody to try and stand with me as I'm advocating for my needs.
As far as the black
oh my God, I'm ready for this.
Hold on, King.
Okay.
Let Carla.
Yeah, bro, I'm totally ready for this.
We're gonna let Carla talk, and then we'll come back to you, Frederick. Thanks.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm still okay. Cool. Okay, cool. Okay, so this has been my focus for 7 years, because I had to have a child in order to realize that I'm actually a woman. I don't know what my brain was doing before then, but sex was awesome before then. Just I had to have a child in order to realize, like, oh my God, I'm a woman. And here's what I've come to learn, and here's why I had that mental space prior to having a child. Being a woman is powerful. What I can... Black people somewhere down the line, and there is a pinpoint, there is a book, Dr. Belt gonna drop the link with the second I say it. Okay, y'all. somewhere down the line, Black people adopted white male patriarchy. So how they chose to view and see themselves and define themselves and protect themselves, of course, because all of us are here in America post 1619, eventually you begin to give and take from both of those cultures. And a lot of Black people took on that white male patriarchal ideology. Black people, we are naturally matrilineal. We do it without even knowing the word matrilineal exists, because you can't piss off your mama. You can't piss off your grandma. You do something wrong and you with your auntie, and your auntie might not even be a blood auntie. She gonna come for you first, then your grandma gonna come for you, and then your mama coming for you next. So we naturally depend on women. We just depend on them for our say-sos, but treat them in the same manner of white male patriarchy, which is to be seen as my personal favorite, a second. Boom. My name is Carla Aaron Lopez, AA for a reason. I've always been number one. Okay. So I ain't nobody's number two. Then on top of that, to believe that women are less than or not equal to, and then you yourself as the woman adopts that philosophy. And then when your feelings get hurt, then all of a sudden all dudes ain't nothing. Whole life problem. What I personally believe, and a lot of people will really disagree with me, is that a combination of third wave feminism, a combination of learning the history of womanism, starting with Audre Lorde, and then also a combination of just really understanding a little bit of queer theory. We could rewrite how we view each other as Black people. Black men, they do get the lesser. They don't get the lesser, they get the worst of the worst. They can only be two types of characters. But if there's a one and there's a two, there's a whole lot of space in between one and two that you can be. Now, you can have fun with that however way you want to. But what I do know is that if your identity is based on white male Christian patriarchy, we're never going to have no little oneness. We can't even agree on one Black narrative. We agree that there is a Black experience felt worldwide. But for Black Americans, there's no basis to the story, because we can't get people to agree on the history of our story. And we have posters of our heroes that tell us the way. If you are looking for oneness with anybody, you are going to have to reprogram yourself and reprogram your thinking and challenge your thinking. Because here's where I stand, and this is what my protest is going to be until the day I die. I will always educate and facilitate. I'm not going to coddle white guilt, because my job right now is to go back into my community. Because clearly, playing a part of and playing into whiteness is not being successful for any of us. So tell you what, I'm going to go back to the crib. It's problems at the crib. The crib needs to get fixed. I'll holler at y'all later.
Cool. We're going to go to, Dr. Belk put a thumbs up before you, Frederick. So we're going to go to Dr. Belk, and then we're going to round things up. Hold on, Belk, we can't hear you. There you go.
I thought I had on mute, but then it went back to mute. So
Got you.
To go to Rochelle's question, the three Black women who helped to create the Black Lives Matter hashtag and birth that movement recognize that same tension that you're talking about, which is why they came back with Say Her Name, right? To center Black women who have been victims of police brutality, police misconduct. And if I think about the three most recent cases, Breonna Taylor was killed in March, and we didn't learn about it for quite some time, right? And then there's no video because all of the officers that were involved, their body cameras weren't on or something like that. And the same thing happened in the case recently with David McAtee. So there's no video. Ahmaud Arbery, there was video. George Floyd, there was video. And I think those things sort of elevated that case. But if you're following the right kind of people on social media, journalists, scholars, and others, they bring those folk up all the time, right? And so you can't really be for freedom, justice, equality, peace, liberation of Black people if you exclude or minimize Black women, if you exclude or minimize queer folk, right? Because our history is replete with examples of people like Harriet Tubman and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and Anna Julia Cooper, right? And then when we talk about queer Black folk, so you ready to kick James Baldwin out of the community? Are you ready to kick Octavia Butler out of the community? Audre Lorde, Pauli Murray? I'm freer because of these queer Black people, right? And they loved me. They loved the idea of me before I was a person, right? Because I'm someone that's born in the shadow of the freedom movement, right? Out of myself to my former students. I was born in 75. I'm a Gen Xer. And I'm born just a decade after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And my parents fled the Jim Crow South for New York City in 1970. So if all of these people fought for a world where I could do the things that I've done and do the things that I'm doing, how can I then not honor that bridge by fighting for them too, right? So I do think that your larger point is well received, that sometimes these things that happen to Black girls and women don't get as much attention. And so, yeah, we have to do more to lift up Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland and Ayanna Monet Stanley, who is 7 years old, right? We do have to lift them up and keep their names in the conversation. And sometimes that's not even on the people in our community, that's on the press. And we need people in the press to do better.
All right, guys. This talk was amazing. I want to say, oh, hold on, Frederick. He's pointing his finger at me, telling me no.
Yeah, I had to say something. I thought I was next in line. I'm gonna be short though. And then also, yeah, individuals like Bayard Rustin as well was very important throughout the civil rights movement with Dr. Martin Luther King. Through documenting individuals, be it from an oral history standpoint, I was able to gain a deep appreciation for women with regards to their trials and tribulations, the rape, the utilizing the bodies in bedding. There was something that I read, and there was an enslaved woman, and right after she gave birth via C-section, the bet that these two enslavers had was they put a kitten inside of her body, and they sewed her stomach up. And this happened in Alabama. And they made a bet on how long it would take for the cat to claw its way outside of her body. Right? So while I'm sitting here with this individual that I'm interviewing and I'm reading it, I'm getting nauseous. And she looks at me and she says, "Brother, don't worry, I got nauseous too." It was one of the reading that literature was one of the most painful things that I've read ever. The fact that they utilize women's bodies, no anesthesia, with multiple different experimentations that they utilize on African American women's bodies, and it was just African people from African descents and native descent it's sickening, right? So then when you move on past the institution of slavery, the rape still occurred. I'm talking, you can go into the 50s and the 40s and the quote unquote help that had some of these children that came out a little bit more fair than the children that they may have had with their husband, is because rape was still happening during that time period up until the 60s and the 70s, right? So when you see the movie The Help, you see these African-American women going into these, Black women going into these homes, they're subject to being raped or sexually assaulted, right? Because when you're in a position to where you can't vote, to where you're in a position where jobs are not plentiful specifically for you at that time period, but you have to provide for your family in order to help keep things afloat, then you become subjective to whatever power structure is there in front of you. And if that is a white male, then unfortunately, some people had to make the tough choice. Do I leave this situation, women specifically, or do I stick it out because I know what it is that I need to bring to the table financially to keep my family afloat? Now, we talk about the white male power structure, but we also have to make sure that we remember that white women were enslavers as well. And this is a book that I'm deep into right now called They Were Her Property. And it came out, I think it was last year that it came out. It's a really good book. But we also have to remember and recognize that it was not only the men who were imposing these strict sanctions, these strict beatings, et cetera. Women as well were very, very complicit in the same thing. I have two ancestors dating back to the mid 1800s that I was able to find, and both of their enslavers were women in Alabama. So, we just have to look at this thing with regards to how women were treated from a comprehensive view. And it was not only just by men, it was also by women. And to be inclusive with regards to trans, LGBTQ, women, Black women as well. When you take the vow to say that I'm my brothers and sisters' keeper, then that's what that means. And that's regardless of what type of genitalia that person does or does not have. That's my firm belief in that. And I'll go to bat with that anytime. You know what I'm saying? So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. Once again, this has been an amazing talk. Thank you again to all the panelists who have joined in with us and has given us like a wealth of information. You guys can find us at Black Market Charlotte CLT. That's BLKMRKTCLT. We are going to have all of their handles on there so you can follow all of these people because they have so much a wealth of information that you guys need. This is also recorded. We're going to have this on our page too, so you guys can share this with your friends, with your families. You guys can repost. Thank you guys for coming out to Let's Talk Dammit. Continue to stay bold. Continue to stay vigilant. We love you guys. Black Lives Matter. Till next time. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.